What's up, guys? Today we are honored to have invited Avi Loeb. He is an Israeli-American theoretical physicist who works on astrophysics and cosmology. Loeb is a professor of science at Harvard University. He had been the longest-serving chair of Harvard's Department of Astronomy, founding director of Harvard's Black Hole Initiative, and director of the Institute for Theory and Computation within the Harvard-Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics. In 2018, he attracted media attention for suggesting that alien spacecraft may be in our solar system, using the anomalous behavior of Oumuamua as an example. In our interview, we have asked him about this object and his method of defining it, how the mainstream science community sees this suspected alien object in our solar system, his Breakthrough Starshot Initiative, Stephen Hawking, Galactic Federation, and speculation on alien contact.
Okay, the first question, Professor, let's cut to the chase. Everyone now knows that in October 2017, this alien object, Oumuamua, has been discovered by scientists. So its diameter is about like 100 meters long, and it was flying at 26 kilometers per second from Lyra constellation towards the solar system. It has a cigar shape, and also it has been considered the first alien object flying from outer space and has been discovered by human beings. So you insisted that Oumuamua is not a natural asteroid or a comet, but it belonged to like artificially extraterrestrial civilization. It's artificially made. And according to your theory, your theory has stirred lots of controversy in the academia. Could you share with us some of the details? For example, what's the whole process of you discovering this object belonging to like alien origin, and also are there any proofs to back up your standpoint? Thank you.
Yes, so let me start by saying that I see science as an extension of our childhood curiosity when we wonder about the world and ask questions and then do not surrender to prejudice, to notions that we had in the past. That's the way a child learns about the world. And I see science as a privilege of maintaining that curiosity. I didn't have an agenda when this object showed up in 2017. It was the first object from interstellar space discovered near Earth. And it was unusual. At first, astronomers thought it's a comet, but there was no cometary tail. There was no gas or dust around it. The Spitzer Space Telescope put very tight limits on that. And then as the object was tumbling every 8 hours, the amount of sunlight reflected from it changed by a factor of 10. And that meant that it has a very extreme shape, just like a piece of paper tumbling in the wind, because in fact, the best fit to the variation of light was that of a flat object, pancake-like, not cigar-shaped. Projected on the sky, it looked elongated, but intrinsically, it was flat. At the 90% confidence based on the fit to the variation of light that we modeled. And then the object was pushed away from the sun by a force whose nature was unclear because there was no evaporation of this object, no rocket effect. And I suggested that it must be the reflection of sunlight because this force declined smoothly inversely with distance squared from the sun. And that meant that the object must be very thin so that it would have a large area for its mass and sort of like a sail. And nature doesn't make thin objects. In fact, in September 2020, there was another object discovered by the same telescope in Hawaii that discovered Oumuamua. It was given the name 2020 SO. It was also pushed away from the sun by reflecting sunlight without a cometary tail. And it ended up being a rocket booster that we launched in 1966. Obviously, it was artificial because we produced it. The question is, who produced Oumuamua? And of course, if we had an image, we could tell because a picture is worth 1,000 words. And in my case, a picture is worth 66,000 words, the number of words in my book, Extraterrestrial. Yeah, so there was an attempt by scientists to explain the nature of Oumuamua as if it came from a natural origin. And all of these attempts concluded that it's something that we've never seen before, not a comet or an asteroid of the type that we have seen. So for example, there was a suggestion, maybe it's a cloud of dust particles that is 100 times less dense than air, so that when it comes close to the sun, it gets pushed by reflecting sunlight. And the problem is that it will get heated to hundreds of degrees and then will not maintain its integrity if it's a very fluffy cloud of dust. Then there was a suggestion, maybe it's a hydrogen iceberg, a chunk of frozen hydrogen, 100 meters in size, and the hydrogen evaporates just like in a comet, but we can't see it because it's transparent. And the problem with that is the hydrogen evaporates very easily by absorbing starlight, and it would not survive the journey. It can only survive a few million years, which is a very short time. It cannot propagate across more than 1% of the size of the Milky Way galaxy. And then there was a suggestion, maybe it's a nitrogen iceberg, a chunk of frozen nitrogen chipped off the surface of a planet like Pluto. And the problem there is the mass budget. If you go through the calculation, there is not enough nitrogen to explain Oumuamua as one member out of a population of chips of nitrogen. So all of these suggestions involved something we've never seen before. And that's why I'm saying we should definitely consider the possibility that it's artificial, which is something we've never seen before, because it's just like a caveman finding a cell phone. And the caveman is used to playing with rocks all of his life and would conclude that the cell phone is a rock of a type that we have never seen before, just like a hydrogen iceberg or a nitrogen iceberg for Oumuamua. It's a rock of a type that we've never seen before. But this is just the beginning of a learning experience, because if the caveman presses a button, he would realize that this unusual rock records his voice. And if he presses another button, it will record his image. And then it will become clear that it's not a rock, it's something else. And for us, it should be the same learning experience. The next object that looks as weird as Oumuamua should be looked at very carefully, and perhaps with a camera that flies near it on a spacecraft, so that we can tell its nature. And that would be very exciting if we can press a button and see what it does.
I have done some studies on, I searched some materials about this Oumuamua, and I found it quite strange because I was discovered that this object was maneuvering at a very strange rate. It can accelerate and deaccelerate at a very strange rate. So if it's an alien object, do you think that it has a pilot, used to have a pilot, or it was autopilot? What do you think of this? Is this like alien spaceship abandoned by certain beings?
Right, so we don't have enough information about this object because astronomers thought that it's a rock and didn't collect all the information we could have collected. But one thing we know that is very strange about it is that it came from the so-called local standard of rest, which is the frame that you get to when you average the motions of all the stars in the vicinity of the sun. It's sort of like the galactic parking lot. And this object was at rest in that frame. Only 1 in 500 stars is so much at rest as this object was. So it clearly did not come from any of the nearby stars. And it was just like a buoy sitting at rest on the surface of the ocean, and the sun bumped into it and gave it a kick like a giant ship. So that's about its trajectory, why it was really unusual. And moreover, there was this force acting on it that implied that it may be very thin, because it could have been just the reflection of sunlight that pushed it, just like the rocket booster from 1966 that I mentioned, 2020 SO. So these are the unusual facts about the motion of the object, but we don't know what its purpose is. We know that it was tumbling every 8 hours, and it could have been that it's just like a trash bag tumbling in the wind. It doesn't serve any purpose, that it's just trash. But it could also have been because it was trying to collect data. So it had a receiver that was moving around. We don't know what its purpose is. Now, if I want to imagine what kind of equipment we will meet from another advanced technological civilization, I would never assume that there is a living creature in it, because the travel between stars takes very long time, and the biological creatures cannot survive over that time. Space is very hazardous. There are cosmic rays that can destroy living cells, and it makes much more sense to send an artificial intelligence system that we are now developing to drive cars, that will make medical decisions in the future and will outsmart us. And it could be made of electronics that can survive for billions of years in principle, especially if you equip it with 3D printing, such that it can repair itself or even recreate itself. Just like biological systems, it can produce copies of itself when it uses the raw materials on a planet. So what I imagine in terms of equipment that is autonomous, that can operate on its own without waiting for guidelines from the sender, because guidelines take a very long time. Even the nearest star is 4 light years away. It takes like 4 years to travel the distance to the nearest star. So there is no way for a probe sent across the Milky Way galaxy to wait for instructions. It has to be autonomous. But artificial intelligence systems are autonomous after you train them. So just like kids, you can think of them as our technological kids that we will train through machine learning early on and then send to the world. And if we can imagine doing that, sending them to space, then perhaps a civilization that predated us, let's say by 1 billion years, could have done that already and filled out the Milky Way galaxy with such systems. It's quite possible because we know that most of the stars formed billions of years before the sun.
Okay, let's begin our second question. Back in the 16th century, in the Renaissance period in Europe, so the Italian professor Bruno was burned at the stake because he claimed that the sun is the center of the solar system. So it was considered a heresy and he was burned at the stake. So you can see that on the path towards truth, there were some twists and turns. From what I know, the mainstream scientists seem to sniff at topics such as flying saucers and aliens. Many mainstream scientists have been studying this, but they have been labeled as pseudoscience because of doing so. So in recent years, the late astronauts who have been to the moon, Edgar Mitchell, as well as Professor Ray Hernandez, and also another gentleman who is also astrophysicist from Harvard University, Dr. Rudy Shield, and they have started this free foundation for extraterrestrial studies. So under that foundation, there are 30 international scientists. They have already stepped forward to study UFO phenomenon, ET contact, consciousness science, meditation, NDE, and other supernatural phenomena and the sciences. So my question is, Professor, according to your observation in the mainstream academia, are they really repelling this kind of studies or even prohibit this kind of studies? Or our understanding about this is wrong? Could you share with us your opinions? Thank you.
Yeah, so there is a lot of resistance in the mainstream of the scientific community to the study of equipment from other civilizations near Earth. And part of it is because the public is extremely excited about this subject, and there is a whole literature of science fiction and in which the laws of physics are violated and statements are made that are not standing up to the scientific level of credence. But there is a more fundamental problem with discussions on this subject, and that is when we discovered the laws of physics in the universe through laboratory experiments, we realized that all the physical objects in the universe surrender to the same laws and they obey them throughout the entire universe. And so we can feel superior relative to the physical world in two ways. One, that we can understand all the laws that control the evolution of the universe. So that gives a boost to our ego. And the second is that the physical world has no freedom, no choice, except for some uncertainty due to quantum mechanics that we can formulate in equations. But so we are superior because if there was an equation that would forecast the way we humans behave and we knew what it forecast, we could do something different. And that would violate that equation. So we feel superior relative to the physical world in the sense that we are responsible for what happens to us. And in much the same way, we feel superior relative to low-level life, such as, for example, bacteria or microbes. So if, for example, the Perseverance rover finds evidence from primitive life on the surface of Mars, we would still feel superior relative to it because we are intelligent and we are conscious. And the same is true relative to other animals here on Earth. We feel superior because our level of consciousness, our level of intelligence is higher than theirs. But if the Perseverance rover bumps into the wreckage of a spacecraft that we didn't send, that is far more advanced than any technology that we developed, that would be a blow to our ego. And that is fundamentally why it's being denied, why people are arguing that we might be the smartest kid on the cosmic block. There is nobody smarter than we are. And it resembles my daughters when they were very young and they stayed at home. They thought that they are the smartest in the universe, in the world. But when we took them to the kindergarten, they got a better perspective. So for our civilization to mature, it needs to find others. Now, there is another part, I should say, and that is that we don't know, for example, what most of the matter in the universe is. We call it dark matter. And for 4 decades, we invested hundreds of millions of dollars trying to find specific types of dark matter, some specific types of particles, and we didn't find them. And so, to me, now it's clear that we should do a similar search for equipment in space that was sent by other civilizations, because we now know from the Kepler satellite data that about half of all the sun-like stars that look like the sun, have a planet roughly the size of the Earth, roughly at the same separation. So if you arrange for similar circumstances in tens of billions of other planets, you might as well have a civilization that predated us and send equipment into space that we can find. And it would make a lot of sense for us to search for it. And if we search for 4 decades, 40 years, and we invest hundreds of millions of dollars, and we don't find anything, then we will be at exactly the same point as the dark matter searches are now. So in my mind, it should be part of the mainstream, just like the search for dark matter is, the search for such equipment should be, because it has a bigger impact on humanity if we find something. If the dark matter is a specific type of particle, it will not change the lives of people. But if we find that an object like Oumuamua was artificial in origin, it could change the future of humanity. And so we have an obligation as scientists to put it in the mainstream of science. And in July, a few multi-billionaires came to the porch of my home and asked me questions about my book, Extraterrestrial. And as a result, they gave me about $2 million that allowed me to establish a new project called the Galileo Project. By now, we have more than 70 scientists within 2 months that joined the project. And what we are planning to do is search for objects like Oumuamua, or like those unidentified aerial phenomena, these objects that appeared in the report to the US Congress, whose nature was not clear. That report was delivered on the 25th of June. So we have 2 goals within the Galileo project: to understand objects like Oumuamua or the unidentified aerial phenomena. In both cases, we are talking about objects whose nature is not known, that are near Earth. And I very much hope that in the coming months and years, the Galileo project will make a discovery. It's the first time that there is an assembly of scientists working together to build instruments using telescopes to look at the sky and figure out the nature of those unidentified aerial phenomena and objects like Oumuamua.
So you mentioned the UAP report released by the US Congress and Pentagon back in 25th of June, though they didn't really officially acknowledge that these are alien spaceships, but somehow they hinted that these flying vehicles have this ability to maneuver and this flexibility to maneuver, and their technology is definitely far beyond Earth's technology. So what's your opinion about this report, Professor? And do you think that we're getting much closer to official alien contact? Thank you.
Well, the report came out from the government, which is a relatively conservative organization, but not from scientists. It included the incidents that military personnel witnessed, and the camera in a jittery cockpit of a fighter jet is not a scientific experiment. And that's where it became clear to me that this subject should move away from the talking points of politicians or military personnel into the realm of the mainstream of science, where scientists would use scientific instruments such as telescopes and infer the nature of these objects. So just to give you an example, an object the size of a person at a distance of 1 kilometer can be resolved with a megapixel image, an image that has 1 million pixels, using a telescope that's of size 1 meter, which in principle you can buy online these days for $500,000. You can add it to your bag. So this just illustrates that the cell phone cameras are not useful, because they have an aperture that is only a few millimeters, and what you need is a telescope that is many orders of magnitude larger, so that you will get a high resolution image. And if you get a megapixel image of a human-sized object, you can read off the label, whether it was made in a country on Earth or whether it was made on some exoplanet. You can see what it looks like. So it's not a philosophical question whether we are visited by objects that came from another place. So it's basically a question of getting a high resolution image and monitoring the motion of such objects with scientific instruments that we have full control over. So that's the key, to have full control, just like any other scientific experiment. That's what we are planning to do with the Galileo project. We are planning to buy instruments. We already started doing that, and then putting them together and tracking objects of interest. And if it looks like a bird or if it looks like a drone, any human-made object will not be of interest to us. And birds would be of interest to zoologists, but not to me. What we would look for are unusual objects and try to get much more data so we can answer the question of whether they represent technologies beyond what we produce. And my point is, the evidence as of now that was released to the public is not conclusive. It's not convincing enough, but we can get good evidence if we invest scientific resources in that direction. And that's what the Galileo project aims to do. And we plan to use optical telescopes, infrared sensors, and radio detectors to try and monitor any objects of interest that are not natural in origin, not birds or phenomena in the atmosphere, and are also not human-made. So it's just like a fishing expedition where we go out and try to catch fish. And if they all end up being explained by some mundane explanations, if they all end up being sardines, so be it. But we will report. Our data will be open, available to the public, and will follow the standard scientific procedure of analysis.
So the next question is that the former supervisor of the space program of Israel, the former supervisor, also the gentleman was called the father of satellite in Israel, is Professor Ham Ashetz. So he openly talked to the press and said that human beings have been in contact with Galactic Federation and especially aliens from that federation. And also these aliens have signed a treaty of cooperation with the United States government. And not only Donald Trump knew about this, but also he kind of almost revealed this information. But aliens stopped him from leaking this information because they thought humans are not ready. And when we saw the news, we were very shocked because all the mainstream media have covered about this in different countries in details. So, Professor, do you personally know about like Ham Ashed, former like a supervisor of space, the space head of Israel? And do you have any comment on this? We would like to know more details. Thank you.
Right. I don't know him personally. He actually approached me at some point, sent me an email, but I think it was irresponsible to report this story because anyone can say anything. And the key to whether a statement makes sense is whether there is evidence to support it. And the reporter should have asked for evidence because, you know, if someone, there are lots of people that would say that they are Napoleon. And you ask them for their ID card. And if it doesn't say Napoleon on the ID card, you don't pay attention to what they say. And so my point is that people can say a lot of things, but the only way for us to figure out if it's real is to look at the evidence. And unfortunately, he did not provide any evidence. As a scientist, I'm guided just by evidence. The reason I talk about Oumuamua is because the evidence was unusual. It didn't look like a comet or an asteroid. It looked like something else. And that made me suspicious that perhaps it's artificial in origin. And I'm completely guided by evidence, and I want to get more evidence before making a strong statement. So that's why I established the Galileo Project, because science is guided by evidence. But just saying that humans were contacted, there is a federation, without providing evidence is irresponsible. And more irresponsible is to report about it. Now, I wanted to say that the subject as a whole could have a huge impact on the future of humanity if we find such evidence. And when I look at human history, I see that it's being shaped by the desire of groups of people to feel superior relative to other groups of people. The best example is the Second World War, where the Nazi Germany regime basically triggered the death of 75 million people, which was 3% of the world population in 1940. Just think about it, it's 20 times the number of deaths caused by COVID-19 that were triggered by a group of people who decided to feel superior relative to other people. And if we find evidence for a civilization far more advanced than we are, all of our small differences here on Earth would appear completely negligible. And my hope is that it will inspire us all to cooperate and treat each other with respect as members of the human species, equal members of the human species. And I very much hope that this would be one of the biggest influence on finding evidence for a technological civilization that is far more advanced than we are. But there are many other implications, and that's why we should explore this subject scientifically.
So finally, I have this opportunity to ask, because I always wanted to ask an astronomer or astrophysicist about this question, which is about Planet X. So finally got this opportunity. So there's a book in our UFO community, very widely distributed. It's called The Earth Chronicles. So the author is an archaeologist, and his name is called Zecharia Sitchin. So he claimed that aliens might created us, and all the gods in the Asian mysteries, Asian myths are or were aliens. And also in the solar system, there's a planet called Nibiru, which is orbiting in an oval track, and it will circulate around the sun for like 3,600 years. And on that planet, there was a race called Anunnaki alien race. So Mr. Sitchin claimed that based on the archaeological and also the ancient civilizations of Sumerian findings, and these findings can back up this point. So back in 2012, some people reported that NASA claimed the discovery of Planet X, but later they kind of denied that. So my question is, Professor, are you aware of the Planet X Nibiru, and can you talk about that? Thank you.
As far as I know, there was a search by a UV telescope, infrared telescope for planets near the sun, and there are very tight limits, especially by the WISE telescope, on even down to the scale of Jupiter-sized planets, but not much smaller than that mass. Within the solar system, definitely there is nothing that is the size of Jupiter all the way to the edge of the solar system, but there could be something smaller than that. Now, with respect to gods, I should say that, you know, when I teach at Harvard University, I usually tell my class that half of the students in the class are below the median of the class. And they get upset because they don't want to think that they have a 50% chance of being under the median. But that is a statistical fact, irrespective of how much their ego resists that. The median is defined such that half of the people are below it. And if I think about ourselves as a civilization, I wouldn't be surprised if we are sort of in the middle of the distribution of intelligent civilizations in the Milky Way galaxy. We are not the smartest. I would expect there to be smarter kids on our block. And that means that they do not communicate in the way that we do. They don't use the same means to propel themselves. And what we should be is open-minded about what we might see. It would look strange to us if we find evidence for things that they sent out. And when we read mythological stories about gods and so forth, it's possible that there was a visit in the past, although all the documented history that we have on Earth goes back at most to 10,000 years ago. We don't know what happened on Earth more than 10,000 years before that, and there is no documentation of that, except, you know, just the global climate or geological conditions. But if there was a visit more than 10,000 years ago, nobody would have reported about it. And if it was 1 billion years ago, there would be only microbes on Earth. And so when people say, oh, we don't see anyone visiting, for example, Enrico Fermi raised the paradox, where is everybody? This is just like being at home and saying, nobody is knocking on my door right now, and therefore I don't have neighbors. Well, you just need to wait long enough. And the travel between stars takes a long time. With chemical rockets, it would take us 50,000 years to reach the nearest star. So 50,000 years is much longer than our recorded history. So it's possible that we had visits in the past and we didn't notice. And it's also possible that we should keep in mind that you know, we will develop in our laboratories life. Already there are some laboratories getting close to making synthetic life in the laboratory. And perhaps at some point we will be able to create a universe in the laboratory if we understand quantum gravity. So all these attributes that we give to God of being able to create life, being able to create the universe, these kinds of things could be the outcome of a very advanced technological civilization. And if a very advanced civilization meets a much lower level civilization, it would look like an approximation to God.
So you haven't mentioned about the Planet X. So what do you think about this, like personally?
Well, I mentioned at the beginning that there is no evidence for another planet. There are people searching for a planet that is 5 times the mass of the Earth in the outer solar system. It's called Planet 9. We haven't found it. And there could be a planet that is, 10 times or more the mass of the Earth in the outermost part of the solar system, but not closer than that. And, until we find evidence, we shouldn't really believe any of these stories. And as I said before, science is about evidence, and we should all follow the evidence and collect as much evidence as possible. So anyone that is excited about this possibility should become an astronomer and look for evidence using telescopes for either another planet in the solar system or for equipment that was sent by extraterrestrial civilizations, because once you find the evidence, then nobody would be able to argue with you. It will not be a philosophical question. It will be something that you can prove.
So that next question is about documentary I have watched. It's called Moon Rising. So during that documentary, it seems that there were lots of ruins and artificially made ruins about buildings in large quantity on Moon, and some very strange phenomena. So all around the world, many people think that there were some signs of extraterrestrial civilization on the Moon. I'm very curious about that. And also since that NASA also released some footages or images about the Moon, but seems like some people suspected that NASA has kind of changed or edited that footage or images. I'm very curious about that. So Professor, how do you see this? And does that mean we could be not alone?
Right. So the data that was collected in the US is not by NASA. It's collected by the military and the defense systems in the US. And the reason most of it is classified and not released is because the sensors that were used to collect this data are classified. And as a result, the public is not able to see the data. This is exactly the reason why we established the Galileo project, where we will have the data open because the sky is not classified. Astronomers look at the sky all the time. But if something flies above a telescope that astronomers are using right now, they will not track it. They will not try to understand the nature of an object that is very close to us. And the Galileo project will try to do that. We'll track the object and try to get as much data as possible. And in that sense, the mystery will go away, and we will clear up the fog because currently the situation is not healthy. The scientific community ridicules the subject, even though the most conservative organization, the government, is talking about it. And at the same time, the public is left with uncertainty about the nature of these objects, left to speculate. And I think scientists have an obligation to attend to a subject that the public cares about. Because a good example is 1,000 years ago, there were people claiming that the human body has a soul and therefore anatomy should be forbidden. And just imagine if scientists would say, we don't want to discuss the human body because there is nonsense, it's controversial, there is nonsense being said about it. And they would ridicule the subject. Where would modern medicine be? So it's clear that when there is a question of great interest to the public, scientists should get engaged and clear it up using the scientific method. That's an obligation to the public, rather than the scientists staying in their academic community and dealing with questions that are not so interesting to the public. Because the public funds science.
So the next question, Dr. Rudy Shield, also astronomer, astrophysicist from Harvard University like you, and also he's a colleague, and he's very open-minded, and he supports that the ET origin, the theory, basically saying that the Earth's life originates from outer space. And also he studies frontier consciousness sciences, and also you is a founder of the Black Hole Project at Harvard University. University. So there are also other scientists like Stephen Hawking and Michio Kaku. They often talk about extraterrestrial civilizations, topics related to that. So Professor, have you had any in-depth conversation with them? Because personal conversation with Stephen Hawking or Michio Kaku, have you talked with them privately? Can you share with us? Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. Stephen Hawking actually, as I describe in my book, visited my home and he spent 3 weeks during April 2016 inaugurating the Black Hole Initiative and also the Breakthrough Starshot project that I lead. And I discuss it in my book. With Michio Kaku, I spent a couple of hours talking he had a podcast with me, and also we both participated in another podcast organized by someone else, and he basically shares the view that we should examine those unidentified objects the way I think about it. But in all these cases, Stephen Hawking or Michio Kaku, they never organized an experimental effort, a system of telescope that will go out and collect new data and evidence. And one of the things you learn from the experience of Galileo Galilei 4 centuries ago, there were philosophers arguing that they know the answer, that the sun moves around the earth, and they don't want to look through his telescope, and they put him in house arrest. But that only maintained their ignorance. The Earth continued to move around the sun. And today we use this fact for space missions. So we know it for sure. So the fact that these philosophers put Galileo in house arrest didn't matter. Today they would have canceled him on social media. But that's irrelevant. What mattered was the evidence which led Galileo to conclude by looking through his telescope that most likely the Earth moves around the sun. And the Galileo project is inspired by that. We want to find the answers by looking through new telescopes. And even though Stephen Hawking or Michio Kaku say the right things, that by itself is no proof. What we need is to look through telescopes and collect the data so that it will be beyond a reasonable doubt. It's not a philosophical question. It's a question of getting good images and monitoring the motion of these objects.
So the next question is about your new book, which is called Extraterrestrial, the First Sign of Intelligent Life Beyond Earth. So if I remember correctly, you are going to release this in China soon. So could you talk a little bit about your book so that more Chinese UFO fans can read your book? Thank you.
Yeah, so the book was translated to 25 languages, and I had 1,200 interviews over the past 7 months about it. It became a bestseller in many countries, I hope also in China. And it describes the properties of Oumuamua, what made it unusual, unlike a comet or an asteroid, and why I think it may have been technological equipment. And in my mind, it opens a new window into the search for technological civilizations, because in the past, for 70 years, we've been searching for radio signals. And that is equivalent to trying to have a phone conversation. You need the counterpart to be active at the time that you're having the conversation. But a much better approach is to search for relics, equipment left behind, just like we sent Voyager or New Horizons spacecraft into space. Other civilizations may have done that in the past, and they predated us, and they might not be around anymore. Just like a lot of cultures on Earth are not around anymore, but we can use archaeology to find the relics that they left behind in archaeological digs. And in the same way, we can do archaeology in space, searching for debris or relics or equipment sent by civilizations that might not be around anymore. And that, I think, is a new frontier that was opened up by Oumuamua. And for more details, I invite the young people to read my book, because I believe that the next generation might actually find out the answer to this very important question: are we the smartest kid on the block?
Yeah, I will also recommend your book to some of my fans, and most of my fans are very young people. And I have final two questions. The first question is that could you give us like an outlook about future, because you are a mainstream scientist. What do you think the future will go, especially when it comes to the mainstream scientific academia field in the next 5 to 10 years? And what future will we be facing in the future? Thank you.
Yeah, I think that if we do engage in the search the way that the Galileo project does, and if additional funds are allocated, and I hope much more than $2 million that I have right now, I think we should invest at least tens of millions of dollars, if not hundreds of millions of dollars. If we do that, I'm very optimistic that we might find something unusual out there. The worst that we can do is basically say business as usual, and we think that we have no mail in our mailbox. It's just like the solar system can be thought of as a mailbox. And if you don't walk to check whether your mailbox has mail, you might miss it. And that could be unfortunate, because maybe the mail that we have in our mailbox carries a very important message about the future of humanity that could lead to the salvation of humanity. And if we don't open the package, if we don't open the mail, we might miss that message. And so I am optimistic in my nature, and I hope that more scientists will join me, and eventually we'll open that mail and figure out what reality is like, what neighborhood we live in. You know, if we don't look through our windows and claim that we have no neighbors, that will not get rid of our neighbors. It will just maintain our ignorance, just like the philosophers that refused to look through Galileo's telescope. So I'm optimistic. I hope that more young people will join me in the scientific effort, and we will find evidence within my lifetime.
Okay, so the final question is, Professor, can you make a personal prediction about, if, for example, if the civilization, extraterrestrial civilization really exists, so when can our Earth humans get in contact with them for the first time? When can Earth civilization enter into this cosmic era and go into the vastness of universe? So I look very much to that, and really hope that this can happen in my lifetime. Thank you.
Yeah, so my hope is that my book and my scientific work will inspire the young generation of today to get engaged. And I think that together, within a decade or two, there is a good chance that we might find something. And of course, that will change the future of humanity. It will be the most important scientific discovery ever made throughout human history. And since it's so important, we should definitely do it rather than postpone it or not fund it, because the implications are so great. There is no bigger scientific question that we can address. And together with the young people of today that are not trapped by prejudice, I think we can make the important breakthrough that we all need to recognize that we don't live alone in this cosmic neighborhood.
Do you personally think that we can meet aliens face to face in our lifetime and have a lovely chat?
Probably not. My guess is we will meet equipment, perhaps artificial intelligence systems, and we will need to interpret their intent using our own artificial intelligence systems. So it will be just like consulting our kids when we see complicated content on the internet, because our kids are more computer savvy. And here I mean technological kids. The AI systems that we develop will be needed to understand their AI systems.
Professor Loeb, you are a truth fighter. So under such a huge pressure in the academia of the mainstream science, you can stand out to give some evidence about the possible alien existence, alien civilization. So you are a truth fighter, and we Chinese fans are really honored to be here to talk with you. So I hope in the future it can bring more valuable information to our Chinese audience. So that will be the end of this show, and thank you very much. We love you. Bye-bye.
Thanks for hosting me, and I will definitely come back if I have interesting data.